Why did life in the 1970s feel so happy? Like we'd stumbled on a secret we didn't even know we had. Everyday routines, simple joys, and shared values made the decade feel lighter and more connected than today. What if those forgotten secrets still hold answers we've been missing? Community block parties in the 1970s were more than just a summer gathering. They were the heartbeat of entire neighborhoods. Imagine a long street where cars were moved aside and tables lined the pavement, each one filled with casseroles, potato salad, fruit punch, and hot dogs straight off someone's backyard grill. Kids zipped back and forth on bicycles with no helmets, sticky popsicle juice running down their arms, while parents leaned against porch rails talking about work, bills, and baseball games. There was no formality, no event planner, just the unspoken agreement that everyone belonged. Even families who barely knew each other during the week shared food, laughter, and a sense of safety that felt larger than any fence or property line. For children, it meant running free until the streetlights buzzed on. For adults, it was about seeing that you were not alone, that the neighbors down the block were also piecing life together, one paycheck at a time. It was simple and imperfect, but that simplicity made it special. Today, we worry about locked doors and crowded schedules, but back then, people left their worries at the curb and came together because they could. Block parties were not just about food or music. They were about belonging. And in that togetherness, happiness felt natural. Family game nights in the 1970s were the highlight of long evenings when television had only a few channels and boredom was solved with a board. Parents pulled out Monopoly, Life or Sorry, and spread the boards across dining tables that were still warm from dinner. The sound of dice clattering, fake paper money rustling, and laughter spilling from the kitchen filled the house with an energy no screen could match. Children plotted strategies, slipping extra Monopoly cash under the table, while parents played half seriously, knowing it was less about winning and more about being together. Arguments erupted. Someone flipped the board after landing on Boardwalk, someone else cried over losing and sorry. But it always ended with snacks, hugs, and the promise of a rematch. These games mattered because they were an anchor. In a decade filled with inflation, gas shortages, and shifting culture, the family table stayed steady. For kids, the games were lessons in patience, luck, and learning to lose gracefully. For parents, it was about seeing their children's joy up close, face to face, not filtered through technology. Board games kept families close in a way that no gadget could. When the night wound down, the box tops closed with tape and rubber bands to hold everything in, and the memory of laughter lingered until the next time. The house might have been small, but with everyone gathered around one board, it felt full. Family television nights with shows like The Waltons or Little House on the Prairie gave households a kind of warmth that modern streaming never can. Every week, families crowded around heavy wooden consoles with rabbit ear antennas balanced just right, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. The Waltons said goodnight to each other across the screen, and children across America echoed the lines with their siblings, making it part of their own nightly ritual. Little House on the Prairie reminded families of simpler times, where love, hard work, and sacrifice meant more than possessions. Parents often saw themselves in the parents on screen, while children found heroes in Laura or John Boy. There was no skipping ahead, no binge watching. You waited all week for the next episode, and that waiting made it feel sacred. Commercial breaks meant running to the kitchen for popcorn or a glass of milk, then racing back before the show returned. These nights mattered because they set a rhythm. Families watched together, learned together, and even cried together. Happiness was not just the stories, but the way the stories stitched people together in the same room, breathing the same air, holding the same silences. That intimacy is rare today, but back then it was a quiet ritual that made homes feel safe. Community swimming pools in the 1970s were the definition of summer freedom. The moment the school bell rang for the last time in June, kids traded textbooks for towels and spent nearly every day splashing in chlorine blue water. Diving boards bounced under the weight of fearless cannonballs, whistles shrieked from lifeguards, and the scent of sunblock mixed with the sizzling smell of hot dogs from the snack stand. For children, the pool was more than a place to cool off. It was a kingdom of games like Marco Polo, underwater handstands, and daring races across the shallow end. Parents sat on lawn chairs with paperbacks, chatting with neighbors while keeping one eye on their children. The pool was public, yet it felt like home because everyone shared it. Happiness came from little things. The first time you swam without floaties, the laughter after a splash fight, the joy of sipping a soda with wrinkled fingers after hours in the water. In a world before smartphones, the pool was where gossip spread, friendships deepened, and summer days stretched endlessly. For families who could not afford vacations, the community pool was a paradise they could reach with nothing more than a few quarters and a bicycle ride. The happiness was not in the water itself, but in the freedom it gave, unstructured, communal, and completely alive. Camping in state parks during the 1970s was an adventure stitched together with canvas tents, smoky campfires, and the rattling sounds of station wagons loaded with coolers. Families drove out on Friday evenings, pulling into campgrounds where pine trees towered above and fireflies blinked in the dusk. Setting up camp was chaotic. Children tried hammering tent stakes crookedly, parents argued over directions, and everyone tripped on sleeping bags. But once the fire was lit, the stress melted away. Meals were cooked on grills or skewers, hot dogs roasted until blackened, marshmallows puffed into sticky sweetness. Nights were filled with ghost stories, the crackle of the fire, and the constant chirp of crickets. During the day, kids waded in streams, skipped rocks, and ran wild on trails, while parents found a rare kind of peace away from telephones and work. Happiness here was raw and unpolished, the kind that comes from being tired, dirty, and completely satisfied. The simplicity of camping, just nature, family, and a sky filled with stars, made problems shrink. Families rediscovered each other without distraction, laughing around card games played by flashlight until yawns forced everyone to bed. These weekends reminded people that joy did not need money or fancy plans. It just needed time together under the open sky. Listening to FM radio DJs in the 1970s felt like connecting with a close friend whose voice came through the static every night. Before playlists and algorithms, the DJ chose the songs, spinning records of rock, soul, and folk that defined the decade. Their voices were warm, sometimes silky, sometimes wild, always distinct, filling bedrooms, cars, and living rooms with personality. Kids sprawled across their beds with transistor radios pressed to their ears, waiting for their favorite song to play, fingers ready on the record button for a homemade tape. Parents tuned in during long commutes or late-night drives, the DJ's chatter making traffic or silence bearable. Local stations mattered. You heard about concerts in your town, dedications from teenagers in love, and the occasional joke that made you laugh alone in the dark. These voices became companions, shaping moods and memories with every track. Happiness was not just the music, but the sense that you belonged to something, your town, your station, your decade. Even now, people can remember the exact DJs who spoke to them like old friends, filling the space between songs with humor, advice, and humanity. Vinyl record shopping in the 1970s was a ritual that turned every trip to a record store into a small adventure. Rows of albums stretched endlessly, each cover a work of art begging to be pulled from the rack. Teenagers flipped through them one by one, the smell of cardboard sleeves and plastic wrapping mixing with the faint buzz of speakers playing new releases. Saving up money for weeks, finally handing it over for that one album you had dreamed of, felt like triumph. At home, sliding the record from its sleeve, carefully setting the needle, and hearing the first crackle before the music began was magic. It was not just about owning music. It was about discovering it, holding it, cherishing it. Friends gathered in bedrooms or basements to listen together, lying on the floor, album covers spread around like trophies. Each purchase was a statement. This is who I am. This is what I love. Happiness came not just from the songs, but from the hunt, the waiting, the choosing. In a way, every record bought was also a memory kept, and the collection grew like a diary of youth. Polaroid instant cameras captured happiness in ways no other technology of the time could. You aimed, clicked, and within seconds a photograph slid out, still developing in your hands. Children shook the pictures impatiently, breath held as shapes and faces appeared like magic. At birthday parties, weddings, and family gatherings, Polaroids were passed around, warm from the film, each one a tangible memory. Unlike photographs sent to a lab that took weeks to return, these moments were instant, immediate proof of joy. Parents kept albums filled with Polaroids that showed messy haircuts, goofy smiles, and blurry laughter. For kids, the camera was a toy as much as a tool, proof that they could capture life with their own hands. Happiness came from both the picture and the process, the anticipation, the reveal, the sharing. Every Polaroid was imperfect, but those imperfections became part of the memory. Today, scrolling through endless photos on a phone feels hollow compared to the thrill of holding joy in your palm seconds after it happened. Roller rinks with organ music were a cornerstone of 1970s social life, long before flashing lights and disco balls turned them into nightclubs. On weekend afternoons, kids and teens laced up rented skates, wobbling at first, then gliding across polished floors while the deep, cheerful notes of live organ music filled the air. Parents dropped children off and lingered at the snack counter, watching as friendships formed on the rink. Couples held hands as they circled slowly, trying not to fall, while groups of friends dared each other to race or spin. The organ player was part performer, part guide, setting the mood with every note. For children, skating was freedom. Wind in their hair, the thrill of moving faster than their feet could carry them. For teenagers, it was about belonging, showing off, and maybe stealing a glance at a crush. Happiness at the rink was layered, the excitement of speed, the safety of community, the music weaving it all together. The rink smelled of popcorn and sweat, echoed with laughter and occasional crashes, but no one minded. It was one of those places where time disappeared and joy felt simple. Watching Schoolhouse Rock on Saturday mornings in the 1970s turned education into something children actually looked forward to. Cartoons sang about grammar, math, and history with catchy tunes that stuck in your head long after the credits rolled. Kids sprawled on shag-carpeted floors in pajamas, cereal bowls balanced precariously, eyes glued to the colorful animation. Parents were relieved. This was television that entertained and taught at the same time, a rare win for both sides. Songs like Conjunction Junction and I Am Just a Bill were not just lessons. They were cultural touchstones, remembered decades later. Happiness came from the mix of fun and learning, from the feeling that school could follow you home without feeling heavy. Saturday mornings became sacred, a few hours when kids had the television to themselves, laughter echoing in living rooms across the country. Schoolhouse Rock was more than television. It was a soundtrack to growing up, proof that learning could be joyful. Homemade ice cream socials in the 1970s were more than a way to cool off. They were community rituals that brought families together around something sweet and simple. Someone would haul out the hand-cranked ice cream maker, fill the wooden bucket with ice and rock salt, and everyone took turns turning the handle. It was tiring work, but each crank brought laughter, conversation, and the growing anticipation of something cold and creamy waiting at the end. Kids argued over who got to lick the paddle. Parents chatted while adding fresh fruit or chocolate chips, and neighbors often joined in, making the evening feel like a celebration. The taste of homemade ice cream was different, richer, fresher, more rewarding because you made it with your own hands. Happiness here was not only in the dessert, but in the togetherness it created. Ice cream socials were an excuse to gather, to pause the worries of work and bills, and to savor a rare indulgence. The memory of those summer nights, sticky fingers holding bowls of melting vanilla or strawberry, lingers because it was joy shared, bite by bite. The bicentennial, in 1976, was a burst of patriotic celebration unlike anything before or since. Across the nation, parades filled streets with floats, marching bands, and Revolutionary War reenactors. Houses flew American flags, Kids waved sparklers, and souvenir shops sold red, white, and blue everything: plates, shirts, even cereal boxes. Fireworks lit up small towns and big cities alike, each display echoing a pride that felt new even though it was 2 centuries old. Schools held history programs, neighborhoods hosted cookouts, and families piled into cars to visit historic landmarks. For many, it was less about politics and more about the rare feeling of unity, of being part of a country celebrating together. Children remember the tricorn hats, the painted faces, the coins and stamps released for the occasion. Adults remember the sense of optimism. Despite economic struggles, the bicentennial was a chance to look back with pride and forward with hope. Happiness came from that shared identity, from the sight of a nation pausing to cheer for itself. It was not perfect, but for a moment it felt good to be American. Tie-dye t-shirts you made yourself were more than colorful clothes. They were freedom you could wear. In backyards, basements, and even school art classes, kids twisted plain white shirts into knots, dunked them into buckets of dye, and waited for the reveal. The thrill came in unwrapping them. No two patterns were ever the same. Spirals of pink, blue, green, and yellow bursting across the fabric like captured rainbows. Wearing tie-dye meant showing the world your creativity, your individuality, and a little bit of rebellion. Parents sometimes raised eyebrows, but even they could not deny the joy in those bursts of color. For children, it was proof that art could be worn, that self-expression did not need rules. Tie-dye spread across summer camps, concerts, and city streets, a symbol of fun that felt light and unburdened compared to stiff school uniforms or office clothes. Happiness here was in both the process and the pride of slipping the shirt over your head, knowing it was yours alone. Tie-dye was messy, unpredictable, and unforgettable, just like the decade itself. Bell-bottom jeans and platform sandals made fashion in the 1970s feel bold and unapologetically joyful. Walking down the street, you saw flared denim swishing around ankles and towering sandals clunking confidently across sidewalks. The look was playful, loud, and a little rebellious, turning every hallway into a runway. For teens, slipping into bell-bottoms was not just about clothes, it was about identity, breaking away from the stiff slacks and conservative shoes of their parents. The sandals made people taller, the jeans made them feel freer, and together they created a style that shouted happiness. Disco halls, school dances, and shopping malls all shimmered with these outfits, each step an expression of fun. Parents rolled their eyes, but even some of them could not resist the comfort and flair. The happiness was in the way these clothes changed how you moved, how you saw yourself, and how you belonged to a generation daring to be different. Today, they may look dated, but in the 1970s, they were joy stitched into fabric. The Farrah Fawcett hair craze turned one actress's hairstyle into a nationwide obsession. Teens crowded into bathrooms with curling irons, rollers, and hairspray, determined to get those feathered layers just right. Magazines ran tutorials, salons advertised the Farrah, and mirrors everywhere reflected hopeful smiles framed by swooping waves. For young girls, copying her style felt like sharing in her confidence, beauty, and freedom. Even boys noticed, admiring how the style seemed both effortless and glamorous at once. Happiness came not just from achieving the look, but from the shared experience of trying. Friends teasing each other as they sprayed clouds of hairspray, mothers helping daughters with tricky layers. It was a moment when beauty was not distant or untouchable, but something you could bring into your own home. The craze was about more than hair. It was about belonging to a cultural moment, feeling radiant just because you tried. CB radios and the 10-4 good buddy culture swept across America in the 1970s, turning everyday people into chatterbox truckers on the open road. Radios buzzed with nicknames, code phrases, and the constant back and forth of strangers connecting across highways. Kids sat in cars, thrilled to hear their parents say "Breaker 19" into the mic, while truckers responded like old friends. Some families even gave themselves quirky handles, so mom, dad, and the kids each had a name when they joined the chatter. It felt like slipping into a role in a play, except the stage was the highway, and the audience was whoever happened to be listening. The more you played along, the more real the friendship seemed, even though you never saw those people's faces. It was playful, spontaneous, and surprisingly communal. For families, the CB brought laughter during long road trips, turning boring drives into adventures. For adults, it was a way to feel connected, to reach out beyond their homes and be part of something larger. The happiness came from the shared language, the silly handles, the thrill of talking to someone you would never meet in person. It was like having a secret club, and everyone with a radio was invited. Skateboarding's first wave rolled across suburban streets with wooden boards and clay wheels that rattled on every crack. Kids turned sidewalks into racetracks, driveways into ramps, and curbs into daring drops. Parents frowned at the scrapes and bruises, but the thrill of balancing on wheels outweighed the pain. Boards were simple and often homemade, but they gave children a sense of freedom unmatched by bicycles. Neighborhood kids pushed each other to go faster, braver, higher. Every new trick earned cheers, even if it ended in a tumble. Some boards broke, some wheels jammed, but that only fueled the creativity to build something stronger. The risks were part of the fun, and each scar became a badge of honor. Neighborhoods echoed with the sound of wheels grinding and kids laughing as they tried tricks no one had names for yet. Happiness here was raw and reckless, built on scraped knees and the rush of speed. Skateboarding was not a sport yet. It was play, invention, and self-expression. The movement planted the seeds of a culture that would grow huge, but in the 1970s, it was just kids pushing limits on their streets, happy to roll wherever gravity took them. Pop Rocks and other novelty candies fizzed their way into children's hearts in the 1970s. The first time a packet hit your tongue, you felt tiny explosions of sugar crackling in your mouth, surprising and delightful. Kids giggled, showing each other their fizzing tongues, daring friends to dump whole packets at once. Convenience stores sold them alongside other wild treats: candy cigarettes, Lick-M-Aid powder, and bubble gum that lasted all of 5 minutes. Schoolyards were filled with dares, like mixing Pop Rocks with soda to see what would happen, sparking wild rumors of kids exploding. Even though none of it was true, the stories made the candy feel dangerous in the most exciting way. For children, sneaking a pack of Pop Rocks into class was like smuggling in fireworks. For children, these sweets were not just candy. They were entertainment, conversation starters, and proof you were part of the fun. Parents worried about safety. Rumors flew about Pop Rocks being dangerous, but kids shrugged it off and bought more. Happiness came from that shared silliness, the joy of a treat that was more than flavor. It was an experience. Every fizz, every laugh, became a memory stamped into the decade. Collecting wacky packages. Stickers in the 1970s turned everyday brands into a playground of humor. Kids peeled stickers from packs and laughed at spoofed labels that twisted cereal boxes, sodas, and detergents into silly parodies. They stuck them on notebooks, lockers, and bedroom walls, proudly displaying their collections like badges of mischief. Trading with friends at school became a game of bargaining and bragging, each new sticker a small victory. Playgrounds turned into markets, with kids trading doubles for the one sticker they needed to complete a set. Some guarded their rarest finds like treasures, while others happily swapped just to keep the fun alive. The silliness of the parodies gave children a way to poke fun at the adult world of products and advertising. Parents sometimes frowned at the jokes, but even they had to admit the humor was clever. Happiness was in the laughter, the camaraderie, and the way these little pieces of paper turned ordinary school days into events. Kids bonded over the collections, finding common ground in silliness and creativity. Decades later, people still remember the feeling of opening a fresh pack and hoping for a sticker they had not seen yet. School lunchroom pizza squares were legendary in their own strange way. The slices were thick rectangles, more sponge than crust, with cheese that barely melted and sauce spread thin. Yet somehow, kids loved them. Lunchtime buzzed with chatter as trays clattered and the smell of that unmistakable pizza filled the air. For many children, it was the highlight of the week, the one meal they actually looked forward to at school. Kids who usually swapped or skipped lunch held onto their pizza squares like prized possessions. Even if the taste was odd, the ritual of eating it together made it delicious. Friends compared whose slice looked better, traded for extra pieces, and wolfed them down like they were gourmet meals. The taste may not have been perfect, but it was comforting, reliable, and shared by millions of children across the country. Happiness came from the ritual, the line, the tray, the slice, the friends around the table. Decades later, people still smile at the memory of those cardboard-like squares because they were more than food. They were a piece of growing up. Eraser-making pencil toppers in the 1970s transformed the dull grind of schoolwork into something far more colorful and fun. Kids crowded around desks and swapped them like treasures, pulling out pencil erasers shaped like animals, food, or wild cartoon characters. A pencil without a topper looked plain, but with one it became a toy, a companion, and sometimes even a distraction. These erasers were bright, rubbery, and sometimes smelled faintly sweet, making math problems and spelling lists feel less like chores. Children lined them up during class like a miniature army, pretending they were part of games when the teacher was not looking. Recess often turned into show and tell, with kids bragging about the rarest shapes or colors they had managed to find at the five and dime store. Parents saw them as harmless little joys, inexpensive enough to keep kids happy and creative. Happiness was in the collecting, the trading, and the small victories of finding one that no one else had. Even when the erasers wore down or broke, they still lived on as keepsakes at the bottom of pencil boxes. In a world without smartphones or tablets, these tiny toppers made homework feel less lonely, reminding every child that even school could have its moments of delight. Earth Day's beginnings in 1970 gave the decade a new way of thinking about nature and the future. Across the nation, schools, parks, and city squares filled with people planting trees, picking up trash, and carrying signs that declared the planet mattered. Children learned songs about clean air and water, while parents listened to speeches about pollution and conservation. The day was born out of worry, but what people remember most is the hope. For many families, Earth Day was a rare chance to come together with neighbors for something bigger than themselves. Students marched with handmade posters, teachers organized lessons outside, and communities rallied with a shared optimism that small actions could change the world. Happiness came from that sense of purpose, the feeling that each recycled can or planted flower could brighten the future. It was not about politics or arguments, but about unity, a simple declaration that the planet was worth caring for. That first Earth Day sparked traditions that still continue. But in the 1970s, it felt brand new, an idea as fresh as spring itself. Looking back, the joy was not just in the activities, but in the belief that the future was still wide open, and it could be made better with small steps. The rise of jogging in the 1970s turned sidewalks and parks into open-air gyms filled with people in sweatbands, shorts, and brightly colored running shoes. At first, jogging seemed strange. Why would anyone run if nothing was chasing them? But soon, magazines, books, and television shows praised the benefits of running for health and happiness. Parents jogged after work, kids tagged along on bikes, and neighbors waved as people trotted past with determined faces. The act of running became more than exercise. It was a statement, a choice to care for yourself in a new way. Happiness came from the rhythm of sneakers hitting the pavement, the fresh air filling lungs, and the quiet pride of pushing past fatigue. Jogging was affordable, accessible, and flexible. You only needed a pair of shoes and a stretch of road. Communities embraced it with fun runs, charity races, and even school jogging clubs. Families discovered that jogging together meant conversations without distractions, bonding step by step. Though the trend has evolved, the 1970s made jogging a cultural wave, linking health with joy in a way that still echoes today. It showed that happiness could be found not just in indulgence, but in movement, sweat, and the steady beat of your own heart. Car sticker collections in the 1970s were rolling diaries of family adventures. Station wagon windows filled with decals from national parks, amusement parks, and roadside attractions, each one a small badge of pride. Kids pressed their noses against the glass to count the stickers, pointing out favorites from Yellowstone, Disneyland, or local fairs. Parents proudly displayed them, proof that their family had traveled, explored, and made memories beyond their hometown. These stickers were bright, cheerful, and often a little tacky, but that was part of their charm. Collecting them became a tradition. Each trip ended not just with photographs, but with a new sticker to press onto the car window. Friends and neighbors noticed, asking about the stories behind them, sparking conversations that kept the memories alive. Happiness came not just from the stickers themselves, but from what they represented. Time spent together, the thrill of the open road, and the joy of discovery. Long before social media posts and digital check-ins, car stickers were how families said, "We were here, and we were happy." Even after the cars were gone, the stickers lived on in scrapbooks, shoeboxes, and memory. They were tiny reminders that life's best souvenirs were not things you bought, but experiences you shared. Neighborhood kickball games in the 1970s turned quiet streets and empty lots into fields of laughter and competition. Kids dragged out rubber balls, set up makeshift bases with rocks or jackets, and divided into teams without worrying about uniforms or scoreboards. The rules were loose, the teams often uneven, but no one cared. The joy was in playing until the sun set. Streetlights flickering on became the signal that the game was over. Parents calling from porches while kids begged for just one more inning. The sound of the ball smacking against sneakers, the thrill of racing home, the groans of a caught fly ball, these were the sounds of summer freedom. Parents rarely hovered. They trusted kids to play, argue, settle disputes, and try again. Happiness came from the community spirit, the mix of ages and abilities, and the sense that everyone belonged. Even shy kids found a place in the game, cheered on by neighbors and friends. These games built bonds stronger than any playground equipment, teaching fairness, teamwork, and the joy of simple play. Looking back, the memories are not about winning or losing, but about the feeling of running down a street with friends, sweaty, breathless, and completely alive. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Tang was not just a drink, it was a symbol of the future. Pitched as the beverage astronauts drank in space, this orange-powdered miracle made you feel like you were participating in the space race from your own kitchen. Every kid wanted Tang. Every mom kept a jar in the cupboard. All you needed was water and a spoon, and suddenly you were sipping the same stuff that orbited the Earth. It was sweet, artificial, and packed with flavor. And it made you feel cool. The powder never fully dissolved, which meant gritty sips near the end were just part of the experience. If you got the scoop size right, you earned that perfect bright orange glow. Too much, and it was syrupy sludge. Too little, and it was just sad orange water. Tang was more than a drink, it was a cultural event. The jar was wide and squat with a screw-on lid, and every household seemed to have one. Kids felt proud making it on their own. No adult needed. It became the go-to for lunch, after school, and Saturday cartoons. You never questioned the science behind it. You just knew that if it was good enough for NASA, it was good enough for you. That dusty scoop brought the cosmos into your kitchen. Only in the 1970s could a rock become a celebrity. The pet rock craze of 1975 was so absurd it made sense. For just under $4, you could buy a smooth gray stone nestled in a cardboard box with breathing holes and a care manual. It had no eyes, no mouth, no tricks, and kids adored it. Why? Maybe because it was funny, maybe because it was simple, or maybe, deep down, it was because even the most ordinary thing could feel special with enough imagination. Children gave their pet rocks names, personalities, backstories. They were carried in pockets, introduced to friends, given beds made from shoeboxes. Some kids genuinely believed their rock understood them. It never talked back. It never judged. It just was. And in a world of flashing toys and plastic noise, the pet rock was oddly peaceful. A quiet rebellion against doing too much, against always needing more. It reminded kids that anything could be a toy if you loved it enough. The pet rock was not a gimmick. It was a mirror. It showed how much kids could create out of nothing. And somehow, that silly little stone became one of the most unforgettable fads in history. Wearing bell-bottoms and platform shoes meant you did not just walk, you made an entrance. Bell-bottoms flared out like they had their own agenda. The wider they were, the cooler you were. If they swished when you walked, even better. You strutted, you did not stroll. And those platform shoes, they were skyscrapers on your feet. It was about adding height, but it was also about drama. Boys and girls wore them with equal pride, stomping down sidewalks like runways. You could not be shy in bell-bottoms. They demanded attention. They made your legs look 10 miles long and your confidence shoot through the roof. Pair them with a glittery shirt or a fringe vest, and you were the definition of 1970s cool. They made music sound better. They made the disco ball shine harder. Every dance move looked smoother. And when you walked into a room, you did not just arrive. You announced yourself. Cool in the 1970s was not quiet. It was loud, bold, unapologetic. And if your pants could knock over a drink or get caught in the car door, that was the price of greatness. You looked at the skinny jeans of later decades and just laughed. Bell-bottoms were art. The Brady Bunch was a family like no other, and yet it felt like everyone's family. 6 kids, 2 parents, and a house full of laughter, chaos, and pastel-colored drama. Premiering in 1969, but becoming a cultural mainstay throughout the 1970s, it was pure television comfort food. Every episode ended with a smile, a hug, and a catchy lesson on sharing, honesty, or sibling rivalry. It was not edgy. It was not deep. But it was warm. And for kids whose homes were not always so perfect, the Brady Bunch offered a glimpse of what harmony could look like, even if it was idealized. Mike and Carol never yelled. Alice the housekeeper always had a one-liner ready. And the kids? They were just messy enough to be real. You picked a favorite. You sang along with the theme song. You quoted Jan's iconic "Marsha, Marsha, Marsha." It was pop culture innocence. A time capsule of bell-bottoms, perms, and avocado-colored kitchens. And even if you rolled your eyes at the cheese, deep down you loved that family. Because they showed that even the most blended bunch could belong. And that felt revolutionary in its own gentle way. If you remember clacker toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were 2 solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just 2 hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. Atari gaming sessions were pixelated magic. You plugged in a cartridge, gripped a joystick, and entered a world made of blinking squares and bleeping sounds. The graphics were basic, the controls were stiff, and yet you were hooked. Pong, Frogger, Space Invaders. Each game was a challenge, a test of reflexes and patience. You played alone, with friends, or against your sibling for hours. The television hummed, the screen flickered, the joystick squeaked under the weight of your determination. Games froze, scores reset, but the fun never stopped. Atari brought the arcade home, turning dens and basements into battlegrounds of bragging rights. There were no saves, no checkpoints, just you and your ability to last longer than your last game. Every win felt epic, every loss felt personal. And if the cartridge did not load, you took it out, blew into it like a sacred ritual, and tried again. Atari gaming was simple, frustrating, and unforgettable. It was not about the graphics, it was about the experience. And for those who held that joystick and battled blinking enemies, those early games are etched in memory. Proof that sometimes a bouncing square was all it took to feel like a hero. In the 1970s, you could walk into any living room and find a macrame plant hanger swaying near the window. Handmade from twisted cords, thick yarn, or even old rope, these hangers were more than decoration. They were statements. Your mom or aunt probably made one at a craft night or picked one up at a flea market. They cradled ferns, spider plants, and anything green, sometimes hanging over orange shag carpeting or wood-paneled walls. Some had beads woven into the strands. Others had patterns that seemed to hypnotize you if you stared too long. They were often hung with a brass hook screwed right into the ceiling, dangerously close to ceiling fans or light fixtures. But no one cared. It was groovy. It was artistic. It was freedom and nature brought indoors. The macrame craze represented a return to earthiness and personal touch. You were not just buying a product, you were tying every knot yourself. And if you were not making one, someone you knew definitely was. These hangers aged, gathered dust, sometimes sagged under too much weight, but they were beloved. They matched the houseplants perfectly and brought warmth into every room. Seeing one today might feel like stepping into your grandmother's sunroom on a quiet afternoon, the scent of potting soil and lemon-scented furniture polish in the air. There was something sacred about turning off the lights and flipping on a light Breit. Suddenly, your bedroom transformed into a tiny, glowing studio. With each colored peg you pressed into the black screen, magic happened. Reds, blues, greens, and yellows lit up like little fireworks trapped in plastic. Introduced in the late 1960s but beloved through the 1970s, Lite-Brite was not loud. It did not move or speak, but it taught kids something powerful: how to make beauty, one dot at a time. You started with a blank template or maybe a paper guide with letters, but over time, you stopped using instructions. You made your own stars, your own hearts, your own masterpieces. It was slow, patient, personal. The warmth of the bulb inside hummed beneath your fingers. You could feel the light, not just see it. Sometimes you messed up, pulled out the wrong peg. It did not matter. You just kept building, fixing, creating, and when you finally stepped back and saw your little glowing creation, it felt like pride. Not toy pride, real pride, because you did that. Lite-Brite made every child an artist. And in a world of noise and chaos, it offered a quiet glow of control, creativity, and calm. Following the Love Boat and Chips meant you liked your drama with a side of flair. These were not just shows, they were events. If you were glued to the screen every week, you were chasing adventure without leaving your couch. The Love Boat was a floating soap opera wrapped in sequins and soft jazz. It made you believe romance could be just a deck away. Chips, on the other hand, was horsepower and highway patrol. It made motorcycles look cooler than ever. And if you were into both, you were unstoppable. You knew how to shift gears from love to action like a pro. Your eyes lit up when the opening theme started. You hummed along without thinking. The plots were sometimes ridiculous, but that was half the fun. These shows let you feel like anything was possible. Love, danger, a wild twist before the commercial break. They made everyday life feel just a little more dramatic. And being part of that? Being someone who followed along every week? That meant you had style. You knew entertainment when you saw it. And the people who rolled their eyes just did not get the magic. They were not just for carrying sandwiches and juice boxes. They were badges of honor. In the 1970s, metal lunchboxes with cartoon characters were everything to a kid. You marched into school like you owned the place if you had the Brady Bunch, Scooby-Doo, or Fat Albert slung over your arm. They clanged when you walked, chipped when you dropped them, and smelled like peanut butter forever. But they were yours. The thermos inside matched the design, with a plastic cup that screwed on top and often leaked just enough milk to give the lunchbox that signature sour scent. You would line them up on the windowsill during class or hide secret notes inside the lid. The paint would eventually chip, the latches would rust, but you never wanted to give it up. Today, they have been replaced by soft-sided, logo-free lunch carriers. But for those who grew up in that era, seeing one again brings back the sound of the bell, the taste of a bologna sandwich, and that magical feeling of opening your box and hoping you got a Hostess cupcake instead of raisins. They were loud, proud, and deeply personal. One glance at the dented metal, and the memories rush back like a school bell in September. Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad, or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends, you collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones: root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. Barbie in the 1970s was more than plastic. She was a portal, a way to imagine what life could look like if the world were just a little more pink, a little more perfect. Kids did not just play with Barbie, they lived with her. She had outfits for every occasion. Dream houses with elevators, cars with glittering wheels. She could be a doctor, an astronaut, a fashion model, a veterinarian, all before you had even picked a major. Her world was one where nothing felt too big to dream. And for a generation of girls, and more than a few boys, Barbie was proof that you could be glamorous and powerful at the same time. You could give her stories, drama, triumph, romance, heartbreak. You could change her hair, swap her clothes, reinvent her life in one afternoon. Barbie taught kids to narrate, to imagine, to believe that reinvention was normal. And even when her legs got loose or her hair went frizzy, you still loved her. Because she had been there. She had danced across your carpet, ridden in your bike basket, and laid beside you on nights you were too afraid to sleep alone. Barbie was never just a doll. She was you, just with a better wardrobe. If you had a concert tee in the 1970s, you were not just dressing. You were making a statement. A faded shirt with the Rolling Stones lips or the iconic Pink Floyd prism was like armor. People looked at you differently. They assumed you had seen things, felt things. The louder the print, the cooler the kid. But here's the kicker. Half the people wearing them had not even been to the concert. That did not matter. What mattered was that you looked like you belonged to something bigger, and if you actually had been there. If you really did stand in the pouring rain at a Led Zeppelin show or felt the ground shake when Kiss came on stage, then your shirt was a relic. You washed it gently, you wore it proudly, and if someone tried to copy your look without earning it, you called them out. A concert tee was not just cotton and ink, it was lived experience. It said, "I was there when music meant something." And if it had rips or stains, that only made it more legit. That shirt could outlive friendships and survive every trend because it was not about fashion. It was about fire. And that fire? That made you cool. The Viewmaster was not just a toy, it was a portal. You held it up to your face like binoculars, clicked the lever, and entered a new world, one tiny slide at a time. These were not just pictures. They were 3D windows into places you had never been and shows you loved. Suddenly, Bugs Bunny was popping out at you. You were walking through Disneyland or swimming under the sea. The images were bright, bold, and vivid, especially when the sunlight hit just right. The reels came in paper packets, labeled like treasure maps, each one promising a new adventure, and you kept them all, in shoeboxes, in drawers, maybe scattered across the floor until your mom made you pick them up. The Viewmaster made you feel like a traveler, even if you never left your room. It was quiet entertainment. No batteries, no wires, no screens. Just your imagination and a satisfying click with every slide. The joy was in the anticipation. What will the next picture be? Where will I go next? You could spend hours lost in it. You remember how your arms got tired, but you kept clicking. One more reel. One more journey. Because for those few minutes, the world was just you and the magic inside that plastic viewer. Roller rink socials were where friendships formed, crushes blossomed, and fashion collided with fluorescent lighting. Every weekend, kids flocked to the local rink like it was the hottest club in town. You laced up rental skates that never quite fit, wobbled onto the floor, and tried not to fall in front of your classmates. The music blared, everything from Madonna to Michael Jackson, and the lights spun in pinks, blues, and greens. Couples held hands during the slow skate. Kids showed off their best moves during the speed rounds. And when you got tired, you grabbed a slice of cardboard-flavored pizza or a snow cone that turned your tongue electric blue. The carpet was hideous, the lockers never worked, but the vibe? Unbeatable. Roller rinks were more than entertainment. They were a rite of passage. You had your first dance there, your first bruise, maybe even your first kiss, awkward and giggly behind the concession stand. Parents watched from the sidelines or dropped you off with a reminder to call from the payphone. The rink was loud, sticky, and chaotic, and yet it was magic. Even now, the smell of rental skates and popcorn grease brings it all back in one wheeled rush. Rocking tie-dye shirts in the 1970s was like wearing your soul on your chest. You could not buy that kind of vibe off the rack. Cool kids either made their own or knew someone who did. Every swirl, every burst of color told its own story. It was rebellion soaked in dye. It said you were not afraid of standing out, of being different, of being loud in a world that wanted quiet. Tie-dye was part art project, part political statement, part badge of identity. You wore it to concerts, to school, to the park, anywhere you wanted to feel like yourself. And when someone asked where you got it, the coolest answer was, "I made it." That meant you knew the ropes, rubber bands, buckets, gloves, the whole messy magic. Your hands were stained for days afterward, and that was a flex. Tie-dye was about peace, love, and sticking it to the man, but mostly it was about expression. No two shirts were alike, and if yours had just the right burst of violet next to the green spiral, you knew you had nailed it. The shirt was not just cool, it was you. In a decade bursting with color and energy, tie-dye was a way to carry that vibe everywhere you went. The Muppet Show was barely controlled chaos, and that was exactly the point. Hosted by the endlessly stressed Kermit the Frog, it brought puppets and celebrities together in a late-night variety show that aired in prime time but captured the hearts of kids everywhere. Launched in 1976, it was not just a puppet show. It was the puppet show. Gonzo, Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Animal. These were not background characters, they were stars. The sketches were wacky, the musical numbers were weird. And the jokes, they were sometimes just a little over your head. But you laughed anyway, because the Muppets were alive. They bickered, they loved, they failed spectacularly, and that made them feel human. It was beautiful chaos, held together by heart and felt. For many kids, it was their first taste of satire, of theater, of performance, and it stuck. It felt like a secret shared between generations. Kids laughed at the slapstick, adults smiled at the subtext. The Muppet Show was fun, yes, but it was also oddly emotional. These puppets had dreams. They wanted applause, and watching them chase that, week after week, made you want to chase your own. Before Bluetooth speakers and streaming playlists, there was the Fisher-Price record player, and it was a masterpiece of childhood simplicity. You wound it up with a chunky white knob and placed a thick plastic disc on the turntable. It clicked into place, and when the needle dropped, the magic began. Out came twinkly, music box-style versions of nursery rhymes, folk songs, and lullabies. The songs were short, cheerful, and unforgettable. The discs were colorful and clunky, with molded ridges that somehow produced melodies. It did not matter if the sound was a little warped or off-key. You were in control. You had your own music machine. For many kids, this was their first experience playing music, and the pride that came with it was unmatched. You could stack your favorite discs. You could play the same one on repeat until it drove your parents up the wall. And the best part? No batteries. Just your hands, your ears, and your imagination. You did not need to understand how it worked. You just needed to hear that familiar click, feel the turn of the crank, and know that something sweet was about to happen. It was low-tech joy in a beige plastic box, and it never stopped playing in our heads. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, two shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there! Do not move!" and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Simon was not just a toy. It was a glowing memory test disguised as a game. When it was released in 1978, nothing else looked or felt like it. A black plastic disc with 4 glowing quadrants, red, green, blue, and yellow, it dared you to follow its sequence. And with each round, it got faster, more intense, more impossible. Kids gathered in basements and bedrooms, fingers trembling above the buttons, desperate to keep up with the hypnotic pattern. The sounds were etched into memory: high, low, sharp, hollow. Each note meant triumph or failure. Losing meant watching that smug little light flash mockingly while your friends laughed or groaned. But beating a high score? That was legendary. There was no screen, no joystick, just lights, sounds, and your ability to focus like a laser. In a world that often felt loud and chaotic, Simon forced you into silence, into pure attention. And for that moment, you were in control. You were brilliant. You were winning. It was like mastering a secret code no adult could understand. Simon was not just a game you played. It was a game that judged you. And in the late 1970s, that was the closest most kids got to feeling like they were living in the future. If you were staying up late for Saturday Night Live in the 1970s, you were not just watching comedy. You were witnessing rebellion. You were cool if you knew when to sneak into the living room, keep the volume just low enough, and soak in every second of a show your parents probably did not want you watching. The cast? Legends in the making. Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi. They were not telling jokes. They were pulling the rug out from under the country and laughing while they did it. The sketches were weird, wild, dangerous, and you loved every second. You quoted them at school the next day. You mimicked the voices. You tried to explain the jokes to people who just did not get it. And that made you feel superior. This was not safe television, it was live. Anything could happen. Anything did. And if you were part of that midnight crowd, you were in on something. The rest of the world could have their sitcoms. You had chaos, you had brilliance, you had Saturday night. That kind of cool was not handed out. It was earned by losing sleep and gaining insight. So as we look back on the little joys that made the 1970s so happy, tell us in the comments which memory means the most to you. Then like this video and subscribe so we can keep reliving these forgotten treasures together.